Hello, and welcome to episode 29 of Legal Content Chat. I am coming to you from a different location today. You will notice we have a nonetheless fabulous, but still different wallpaper behind me. So I'm at the Great British Legal Offsite today, sponsored by Kate at High Risk. So I'm using her office today. So coming to you from Preston, 3 hours from where I normally am. So today, we've got a slightly different topic than usual, which is going to be a really interesting one because everybody is talking about AI right now and probably will do for the time being as well, for the foreseeable. So it's going to be all about whether your firm actually needs to implement AI tools, whether you're doing it already, whether you're doing it wrong, whether you're doing it right. That's the conversation we're going to be having today. And I've got Rhys with me, the CRO from Definely, and he's going to be talking to us all about how you can do that and do it right. So Rhys, please introduce yourself and tell the audience where you're from and what you do.
Sure. Thank you so much, Becky, and thanks for having me. So I'm Rhys, as a lot of us in legal technology. I'm a former lawyer myself. So practiced for about 5 years at Baker McKenzie within the M&A team. Studied for a year and then was sort of lucky to meet the two founders of Definely at the point they were looking to take their idea to market. So I joined as the first person in the commercial team, zero revenue, zero customers, have now been part of the journey into my 5th year. So we're very lucky as a startup to still be around. We've seen a lot from COVID to zero interest rates to where we are now with generative AI. But Definely is essentially a legal technology tool used by both law firms, in-house teams. We're very focused on the pre-execution stage of the contract lifecycle, helping lawyers really understand the complexity within documents and being able to navigate between those agreements in a much more efficient manner than they currently do. So we're lucky to have about 100 customers now. That includes magic circle firms, white shoe firms, really large financial institutions from the likes of Barclays to the Asian Development Bank. We also kind of talking to the AI piece. We're one of 2 legal technology companies to be backed by Microsoft. So they led one of our funding rounds, and then we recently just closed a Series A with Octopus Ventures this year. So bit of humble bragging there, which is never fantastic, but it's got to be done. I think just important to this topic, we've really been doing a lot of work talking to our customers and actually really trying to dig into what are the use cases around generative AI, what are the benefits, what are the costs, because the costs are immense. Where do you start? How do you actually really start to see where you're driving value and how to drive value? Essentially, do you buy a product? Do you build your own product? Do you borrow a product? All of these questions are being asked in the market, and it is, regardless of what you see in the press, still very much in an experimental stage. So I guess that's the angle that we come in from, is all of these conversations that we have been lucky to have with our customers around how they're approaching these technologies and where they've had shortcomings.
That is very cool. And I think it would be fair to say that the legal industry as a whole does not like change/risk too much. So I can imagine a legal AI tool is met with a fair amount of skepticism. Is that your experience so far, Rhys?
So it's really interesting. And I think before this kind of advent of generative AI, which really kicked off probably towards the beginning of last year, I think legal technology was seen as a fairly unexciting technology, by sort of the investment landscape and the powers that be. And law firms were still kind of incrementally adding technology, going from having almost very little technology, kind of keep the lights on tech, to slowly starting to add more innovative solutions, new features, build out in-house capabilities as well, so their own software dev teams, QAs and so on and so forth. And actually, to their credit, I think almost across all the industries, law firms have actually really been taking the lead in terms of being willing to experiment with generative AI, being willing to actually be quite open about their experiences, what they're seeing, what they're not seeing. And so there's been sort of a bit of a kind of sea change in the preconceptions around law firms and in-house teams and how they use this tech before generative AI to them really becoming at the forefront. You see teams like Microsoft and OpenAI now openly talking about the law firms that they're working with. We know law firm customers who have been brought into early trials of Copilot in order to give feedback. And so they actually are starting to be seen as front runners. That being said, if you really dig into conversations with these law firms, they are still experimenting, right? A lot of outside of a few firms, a lot of this technology is still being used in sandbox environments. It's not being used on live client data. As you know, law firms are also very much at the behest of their clients. They've got to be very careful about what tools, what technologies they use on client-sensitive information, and they need to get their clients' consent. So even if law firms have moved ahead of other industries, they do need those industries to catch up, because those industries are their clients, right? And they need to be equally comfortable with the cloud and using these kind of services over their sensitive information.
Yeah. Okay. So your would it be fair to say that your flagship product is Definely Draft? That's the one that I know the most about as well. So do you want to just talk us through just like a really high level on what that can actually do for in-house teams and also law firms?
Yeah, sure. So appreciate the chance to do a quick plug. But so I was, if the best way to sometimes tell this is through my journey as a lawyer. So, in mergers and acquisitions, you're obviously dealing with quite complex documents, whether it be prospectuses or circulars or share purchase agreements, shareholders agreements, asset purchase agreements, whatever it might be. And these contracts are really complex and they're really hard to read, right? So it's not like a Kindle where you can simply just read 7 lines or 7 sentences and you understand what that contract is telling you. That contract continuously cross-refers to either defined terms, section references in other contracts, references to schedules and appendices. And so what lawyers need to do in order to simply understand 6 or 7 sentences within a 200-page document is continuously context switch. And the way that they do that is they're going to hit Control F for a definition. They're going to scroll to a section. They're going to have multiple screens open and be switching between multiple different documents just to read what's in front of them. So what we do at Definely is we flip the script. So instead of the lawyer having to go and find the information that they need to understand what's in front of them, we'll scan any document, hyperlink any references to external data points, definitions, section references, and bring the information to the user at the point that they need it. So now they can double click on a definition, they can double click on a section reference, they can see the meaning of a defined term in another contract or references to legislation, and they'll never have to leave the page or the provision that they're working on. That's really been, a driver of a lot of success. We have a whole productivity suite now. But really, it's been quite interesting. Before Definely, or lawyers that don't currently have Definely because we don't have a competitor in the market, they're using Control F. They're printing out contracts, unfortunately, like I used to do, or they're using multiple monitors, right? And these are all tools available with the first version of Word in 1995. So we really try to bring up this. So that's a little bit about sort of what our product does. Yeah. There has been for us an additional use case with respect to that product with the advent of generative AI tools. So what we see now with a lot of firms is you would use a generative AI tool to potentially draft have a first take at a particular clause or particular provision. Yeah. But it's going to do that in isolation. And what you need to then do is insert that provision into a 200-page, 100-page agreement. And then you need to make sure that actually what I've inserted actually makes sense within that broader architecture or that broader factual matrix of the contract. And so being able to, insert it, run Definely, and see how it talks to other parts of that contract makes sense has been an important part of that validation process that you need with generative AI solutions.
Sure. Okay. I mean, that just saves a ridiculous amount of time, your solution. So yeah, I can completely understand why you are a market leader in that respect. So talk to me a bit about either the preconceptions, misconceptions that law firms that you're speaking to have about AI. Are there any kind of common themes that come up?
Yeah. So I think the biggest one that we've seen is, it's kind of, generative AI is very much the tip of the iceberg, right? So, obviously it's what you see, it's very shiny, but there is an incredible amount of infrastructure that a firm or a company needs to already have to ultimately be able to support a solution like that, right? So we've seen some firms, for example, get kind of pushed from partners or get pushed from clients to say, are you using generative AI? And they rush out there to buy a generative AI solution, but then adoption, implementation goes really badly because that underlying support isn't there, right? It's very much like going out to market and buying yourself a Ferrari, but you live on dirt roads, right? It's only going to make sense if that infrastructure is there to ultimately support that acquisition. And so the firms, some firms are obviously a bit more mature in this regard, but a lot of times when we're talking to companies, we say, look, what is your plan here? What is your roadmap? What are your use cases? What are you trying to achieve? And then working back to understanding what are the fundamental component parts that you need to have in place in order for that to be successful, right? These tools are expensive, not just because vendors charge a lot of money, but because the cost of compute and the cost to run a query is incredibly high. And before you start incurring those expenses, you want to make sure that your users are in that environment already, that they know how to use this, that they have those guardrails around where they can use it, where they can't use it, what kind of data they can use it on. Just some common examples are, if your lawyers are, for example, already printing out contracts, as I was saying in a previous example, if they're printing out contracts to conduct their review, throwing a generative AI solution at them, within their Azure browser isn't really going to help them, because you're not meeting them where they already are, right? So you need to give them the solutions that they need to actually, come into an environment where that solution is going to be available. You need to understand what the use case is. And I think for us, this has been the most interesting part, right? There was obviously a flurry of activity last year where firms brought this technology on board and then reverse engineered to what pain points they were trying to solve. And it's always a very dangerous world where you develop technology and then try to find a problem for it. You always should start with the problem and then apply a technology layer to it. And then you should kind of, use the least disruptive technology to solve for that pain point, right? It's solving a pain point with generative AI when you could just use normal rules-based logic that doesn't require, a key into OpenAI's Azure services, is like trying to hit a nail with a sledgehammer. It's unnecessary, So a lot of times, a lot of firms went out there, bought the solution, started experimenting, started reverse engineering to use cases. And I think we're reaching a very interesting point now where we come up to year 2, where people are actually starting to look at, well, what are the use cases that we've developed? A lot of them focus on fairly low value tasks, things like help me summarize a contract or, make some queries. But some of the sort of dream world of, ingest a term sheet and spit out an entire contract it's not there yet, right? Which would be a lot of high value tasks. And so people are, CFOs and IT teams are now starting to look at their bills to run these solutions and say, prove to me the return on investment here is something that justifies this enormous cost. And why are these tools specifically to use it? Why are we using OpenAI's large language model when we could use an open source model, right? Like a Mistral or a Llama, whatever it might be. And so I wouldn't say there's a reckoning, because generative AI is genuinely going to be a transformative technology. I just think we had this situation where the opposite of blue ocean strategy, where you kind of create a new product segment, because you have an underserved customer, you have a new product that can solve for that. We kind of had this blue ocean product emerge, so a product that no one was really expecting come out of nowhere. And then everyone's trying to reverse engineer some form of strategy or use case. And there has been a little bit of, well, they've got it, so I want it. And that only lasts for so long, right? At some point, the chickens come home to roost and you need to sort of showcase what you've got. So a lot of words, but, essentially, I think the big points we've seen is you need to have the underlying infrastructure in place. You need to have lawyers that are capable and willing to test technology. The law firm needs to be open in it. The law firms where we see the best adoption are things like where they allow lawyers to build time against testing technology products, right? So that lawyers are not having to do it in addition to their day jobs, in which case they're not going to pay it that same level of attention. Do you have a good common strategy? Have you thought about guidelines around when and how they can use these technologies? Are your contracts all stored in one place? Are your contracts VMS well structured, with proper metadata tagging? All of these things need to come first, otherwise that application layer that you're going to put on with respect to generative AI isn't going to work, because, as I said, you're really trying to put the tip of the iceberg with no underlying infrastructure in place.
Yes, okay. And I guess it's similar to implementing any kind of tech, whether it's legal tech or anything in your business. You've really got to, rather than go, oh, this sounds amazing, we should definitely roll this out without much thought. It's a case of thinking about the problems that you have within your firm. So where are the bottlenecks? Where are we spending like loads of time, and loads of time that Vian has been taken away from their tasks, and things that you can really just tighten up and make everything run a lot smoother. So I think that's the first thing to do, really, is identify those problems and then see the software that can fix them. Like you say, the reverse engineering thing does not make any sense to me whatsoever.
Yeah, exactly. And law firms, use cases are so it's very different to like a car manufacturer, right, where the entire organization is geared towards the single output of motor vehicles. Within a law firm, you have very distinct practice areas, right? And not only distinct practice areas, but they operate within very distinct jurisdictions. So a large law firm will operate in multiple states within America that will have different legislation, different requirements, operate in the UK, Hong Kong, Australia, Chile, you name it, they have offices there. And within each of those offices, there's probably a real estate team, there's probably a private equity team, there's probably litigation teams, employment teams, right? And all of those are completely different industries. They service different clients with different needs, different levels of maturity of technology adoption, for example, right? And so, as you say, where do you start? Well, who has the most pressing use case? Maybe you can look and say, well, let's say, for example, if our litigation team has the highest number of fixed fee matters. So they're moving to a world where it's not billed by the hour, there's a high amount of fixed fee matters. Well, maybe that's the first starting point to really test out a technology, right? Because if that part of the business is just doing fixed fee arrangements, well, then driving efficiency really improves margins. Whereas if you're doing it in PE or M&A, where there might be a higher amount of billable hour work, there might be more internal friction, right? You might encounter people within that business or within that firm who might be more reluctant to adopt the technology. And you might be able to convince them if you can show use cases from other teams that have a more desirable need. So I think mapping out this universe and spending that time, really spending the energy to focus on where do we start, why, what does success look like, right? I think no one's really done what does success look like? Fine. The cost of cloud compute queries, these products is going to be really high. Success will only be a 5x return on this investment, which will be judged by reduced employee turnover because we're automating low value tasks, which has a cost of Y, right? It will be improving efficiency in terms of time taken to complete a task by Z, which if you look at the charge out rate and the fixed fee allows this much increase in our profit margin. Increase client satisfaction because clients are finally seeing that we're using technology to really deliver services to them in a more efficient way. Clients can be quite jaded, thinking that lawyers are always trying to pad their time, which isn't necessarily true. But clients have that perception, and they love it when they see firms saying, well, don't worry, we use technology to automate that. So you can use CSAT scores and stuff like that to really get a sense of, is this technology driving panel retention for us on in-house teams? And I think, honestly, with a lot of the big firms and stuff that we talk to, a lot of that just hasn't really been done, and they're trying to kind of scramble it now. But you always need to have a framework around success, why are you doing something, what it means, and, where do we start? Because, it's one of my favorite proverbs, but, the whole thing about how do you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. You've got to start somewhere, and you've got to have like a tactic as to what you're trying to do here.
I've literally never heard that saying before, by the way.
It might be a South African thing, but at least,
yeah.
You have to start somewhere, and you want to start with that low-hanging fruit. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up for failure inevitably.
Yeah, and this is really interesting and quite timely because at the legal offsite I'm actually at the moment, I was just listening to a talk by Sean Jardine, who talks about value-based pricing a lot for law firms, and he had some really interesting points. He's actually a guest a little bit later on in the month. So I guess speaking about value-based pricing, is a really, obviously for a lot of law firms that are very traditional, that is a massive switch. And of course, a software solution that's going to mean that they can speed things up is not actually in their best interest when they're charging by the hour at all. So I suppose in order, especially for your kind of customers and your audience, you need to be speaking to those more progressive firms and more progressive teams that actually recognize that clients want that value-based pricing. They want things to be fast. They want the onboarding process to be really quick. You know, they don't want to be faced with like 25 forms when they instruct a lawyer, you know, all that kind of stuff.
No, yeah, exactly. You're 100% right. And it's interesting because I was always frustrated when I was a lawyer at how the investment banks would just charge a percentage of the deal fee, and we were having to write narratives against our 6-minute intervals. I do think the flip side, just having been a former lawyer, if clients would be charged on value-based pricing, I think they'd very quickly understand the value being provided by lawyers, and they might want them back onto the billable hour. But you know, I think you're right. I think at the end of the day, you know, as firms embed more technology in their kind of practice, first and foremost, the cost of billing by the hour is going to go up, right? Because it's no longer just the cost of, you know, per lawyer salary divided by time plus margin. It's like, well, every lawyer has access to this huge tech suite. This tech suite or tech stack costs us Y to maintain. That's this cost per lawyer. So that cost is going to drive up fees per hour. And what you want to start doing is, as you say, moving to that value-based model, right? Or what's also very interesting is trying to look at what does law as a subscription service look like, which I think is quite an interesting concept, right? Large language models allow people to query databases, right? The whole concept around RAG system is that you can use a large language model to query your database. And law firms just sit on a plethora of data. You know, we have products that run semantic search over people's DMS systems to help them pull out clauses. And I mean, there's like millions and millions of contracts in there. And if you think about a law firm, when a partner might leave or retire, for example, the manifestation of all of that knowledge sits within that unstructured data of the contracts that they've reviewed and those matters that they've been a part of. And sometimes your client might just want a quick provision like a limitation of liability clause or a passover on an NDA, and they stressed, they want to email their lawyer to ask for it because of this billable hour model, right? And they just do it themselves. But if they were able to query a data set of that law firm via a subscription model, it would be allow them to unlock value, and would also mean that law firms get a new revenue stream outside of the work that typically doesn't come their way because of fear of that billable model. So I think the value-based pricing thing is going to move like a very, very considerable way. I think clients are driving towards, you know, embedding technology into your delivery model. I thought it was publicized, so it's public knowledge, but I don't know if you saw BT, so British Telecoms recently revised their law firm panel. So I think they cut about 4 or 5 law firms from the panel. And what they said was the law firm on the current panel that can show the highest level of adoption and use of AI solutions in how they work with BT will automatically be secured a place on the next panel. Right? That's now a condition that these in-house teams are building into panels, right? And I think there's always the debates that we've had, and I think, you know, we're lucky in that our customers, by virtue of buying our technology, are quite sophisticated in their thinking around billable hours and that kind of stuff. They know that to have a horse in the race, they've got to move away from that thinking. But, you know, I think some of the conversations we've had where people say, well, you know, there's a reluctance of the billable hour because if I take away 30 minutes from a lawyer, that's 30 minutes that they could bill, right? Now, the huge assumption in that is that you have the work to bill in the first place. And if clients are increasingly looking at your technology stack as whether they're going to give you the work, then, you know, regardless of the fact that you can sneak in an extra 30 minutes, you're not getting the work to even pass that time through. Right? So you've you know, it's kind of, to stay in the race, you have to be thinking about your tech strategy. It has to be integral to how you work. And I think some of the other things you mentioned, right? Like it can't just be, we'll buy some tech, we'll do a bit of press, and then all is good. You've got to be serious about implementing it. You've got to be serious about giving lawyers freedom and time to experiment, to help identify use cases, to move from some of that mindset that is needed in lawyers to, you always have to be right, you always have to be perfect because of the risks associated with that, with understanding that software, you're going to make mistakes, you're going to learn as you go, you're going to iterate, you're going to give feedback, and building that into that kind of mentality is important. And the firms that are doing that right and the firms that are doing that well are very quickly accelerating past their peers, essentially.
Yeah. So this might be a massive question. It is a massive question, which we have already sort of touched on. But we said in the description that we were going to be discussing how firms can, future-proof themselves by using AI, which you have touched upon as a little bit. So is there anything else you wanted to add around that? I mean, like you say, staying in the race, embracing all of these tech tools are going to help. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
Yeah. So, I mean, what I would say is, I think a lot of the stuff that we've said applies, right? So future-proofing, understands first you need to have a perspective on what the future is. I think it's important for law firms to sit back and not just rush to purchase the fashionable tool, but actually understand what is the initiative, what do we think the future is going to be, and how do we play in that environment, right? So obviously if the assumption that you adopt is in 3 years, the billable hour model is no longer going to be a big part of business, or you say, well, in 3 years, our hypothesis or some assumption states that every in-house team will require law firms to have a technology stack that they can showcase as part of winning new business, right? Or that law firms will move to a subscription model. Like, what does the future look like? What are you proofing against, right? Like, what I mean, this future proof is a great word, but the first thing is, what is your prediction on what the future is going to entail? Once you've reached that point, right, then you can work back and say, okay, in order for us to be there, our lawyers need to be very comfortable using technology. Our lawyers, we need to have a culture in the firm that, you can take time out of just doing client work to focus on doing horizon scanning of what's in the market, right? Attending conferences, attending events, talking to peers, being parts of communities, all of that kind of stuff, changing the culture. And then saying, are we at 0%? Are we at 25%? Are we at 50%? Are we at 75%? Are we at 100% in terms of where we are on this journey? Do we need to start with, migrating all of our contracts into iManage Cloud as opposed to iManage Local? Because if they're not iManage Cloud, then we can't pass any data over them using a generative AI solution, right? Do we need a subscription to OpenAI through our Azure services? So like, there are all of these blocks that need to happen first. Do you need to buy, additional? You can do like buy Azure credits in advance so that you're securing the cost up front, so that when you draw down on that using tokenization or whatever it might be, costs aren't going to run away. And I know this stuff sounds boring, but it's really the stuff that you need to be doing. And then you can start layering technology. Okay, well, our lawyers are still printing, our lawyers are still, doing all of these kind of things. Cool. Well, maybe a tool like Definely Drafts, low-hanging fruit, get our lawyers in. We can get our lawyers using this product. Now we've done that. We've finished an iManage cloud migration. We can start looking at adding a generative AI layer on top, but we're going to do it in a sandbox. We're going to test this. And then do what startups do, right? Like what we do is we bring our customers into all of our conversations. Like our product roadmap is almost purely driven by what our customers want from us, right? And so don't be afraid to talk to your clients. If anything is going to strengthen the relationship, it's not a sign of weakness, right? It's a sign to say, look, go to your clients and say, look, we've got this solution, we've got the sandbox. Invite them to come in and test out and say, what do you think? This is how we work in. These are the use cases that we think will be really valuable. What are some of your use cases? So we lucky in that we work with big in-house teams and law firms. There's some really compelling use cases with in-house teams. And I think a lot of in-house teams are smaller than law firms oftentimes, right? They're way more stretched. A lot of the asks on them are massive. They might not have internal software development teams focused on lawyers, for example. And maybe then with a law firm, it's building out a solution in conjunction with your clients, right? That's an additional revenue stream, for example. And it shows that you're serious about technology. It builds stickiness, right? Which is a word we love in software, like make your customers as sticky as possible. So all of these kind of things, being willing to iterate, being willing to fail, being willing to experiment, I think with generative AI is really important. And if you're trying to experiment in a year from now or 2 years, when the people who have been experimenting for 2 years ahead of you are far ahead of the curve. They know the use cases, they know the value, they know whether they're open sourced, LLMs or closed source LLMs. They've got their own RAG models trained on their data, all of this kind of stuff. You're going to fall behind because this technology is moving very, very quickly, and you need to be willing to move as quickly. And that's cultural change, it's infrastructure change, it's operational change, and it's having these product feedback loops with respect to your customers.
Yeah, that's it. And I know I wrote a blog post recently on, advancing the tech into teams, and I think there's a big piece around the younger generation that are coming in to legal, and this technology, everybody's very used to using it in their day-to-day life, so it's almost like a no-brainer, or it's a given that you should be using those kind of tools within the workplace as well. So is that something you see with like more junior members of the staff kind of really advocating for the tech to come in, because it's going to make their life easier, probably number one, isn't it?
Well, that's the thing, and to be honest, they're probably going to use it anyway, right? So
if
the firm doesn't adopt it, they're probably going to go on ChatGPT or on Gemini and just draft an email or just help out. Because when you're starting out, and I remember when I started out and you finish university, like drafting emails in a correct structure, getting the tone right and all of that kind of stuff are skills that you really have to learn. And that's such an easy process with ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever it is that you choose to use, right? Yeah. So the risk is that these young people are a lot more digitally native than myself or anyone within an organization. They use these tools in their day-to-day work, probably use them at university, just test out certain things. So the big risk is that they're going to use it, right? Now, you don't actually have access to those products within a controlled environment where you have put in place those guardrails. You very quickly start running that risk of they're just going to go elsewhere and use it and potentially jeopardize, data security and all of that kind of stuff. So the younger generation are strong advocates for this kind of solution. The risk is they're probably just going to use it regardless, right? Just to be honest. And I think they can really be the ones that can drive new use cases, that can really help drive adoption in the firm. Our biggest strategy for driving adoption post a sale, where we go from 20 people doing a proof of concept to rolling out to 5,000 lawyers globally, is a champion-based strategy, right? Find those advocates, turn them into the champions, and let them sell to their peers. Let them show them how to use it, because that's how you get that viral kind of growth, right? And you have to be willing, I think, to bring in those junior people. You have to be willing to listen to them, which can sometimes, sort of friction or rub against the wrong way of how law firms are typically done, quite top-down structures of people saying, well, that's how I was trained, so that's how you're going to be trained. There has to be an understanding of, senior lawyers can offer a lot of experience and a ton of learning around being a lawyer, being a good lawyer, and all of that kind of stuff. But there can be reverse learning on using this technology, how easy it is. It's so easy to use, right? It's often those things, if you put it off in the back of your mind, like on your to-do list, there's always the one item that you just like, I never want to do it. It's going to take up so much time. And then you get it done and you go, well, why did I worry about that? That took pretty quick,
Yeah.
Once you start using it, you realize that they're super intuitive. That's why OpenAI's grown to 1 billion users or whatever it is in a year, because it's easy to use, and you just need someone willing to take that time, learn, understand how to change the workflow is going to be important. So you need to use the younger champions. You need to be willing to listen to them. And if you don't, because they come into a world where they've been using this technology for a while, you run the risk that they're going to use it anyway, and they're going to use it outside guardrails and guidelines where you can actually manage that data. And that's a huge risk, right? Because now if you get clients find out that your data's gone into a public server and someone's used it like that, the end of that relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's another piece around that with the younger generation too, with talent and retention. I mean, it's still very much a candidates market. And I think anybody looking to join a law firm or to join a legal team, once they learn it in the interview process or onboarding that, this place is switched on, we use tech to streamline our processes. We don't have juniors just sifting through contracts after contracts as part of their initiation process. It's not like that, that's going to be really attractive to candidates.
100%. And, if you talk to, I guess, sort of, let's say, my cohort of lawyers who got to, maybe a few years as associates and then left. And, we have obviously lots of friends in the kind of legal tech startup market who are all former lawyers at big firms. We were all the same, right? We were just, the reason why we left, we were just thought, we've studied for so long, we've done so much, and why am I spending, my time until 3 a.m. in the morning, paginating a construction litigation document, or this is not an effective use of my time. And, we weren't as technically savvy as, some of the generations coming through now, but we knew enough to know that there's got to be simpler ways to do this. And we just left the legal industry, right? But now what you have is, as the competition for talent heats up, and you see it every year, these law firms they increase NQ pay to ridiculous amounts, right? And there's a diminishing return on that. At some point, people are going to say, look, you can't just keep paying me more and more to just take more and more away from me. I like another £10,000 when you're already getting paid £160,000 at 25. There's someone saying, look, that's fine. We're not going to give you an increase, but you'll be home for dinner with your friends, or, you'll be able to go out on a Sunday and watch the Euros, and you're not going to be working in an office because here's the technology that we use, which will cut down the time that you're doing. At some point, you're going to lose people, right? I think, I mean, I don't know the studies offhand, but, more and more generations are coming out. Whilst obviously there's always a money incentive, there are much more things that people value outside of just getting paid. It's the value of my time. It's time with loved ones. It's time with friends. It's going on holiday and not packing your laptop with you. And those firms that can say, look, here's what we can show you. This is what we do. You're not going to have to do this because of this technology. You're not going to have to do this because of this technology. And there might be the occasional late night, but we're doing everything to make your work-life balance as good as possible, maintain your mental health and give you time back with family and loved ones, right? Because the amount of people like me out there who just left law, even because we could see a very good path to earning well, but we just said we couldn't care less because, I care about other things in life, it hurts firms, right? I think the cost to replace a lawyer is like £250,000 or something like that.
Yeah, and that is absolutely huge. And it's actually getting that work-life balance right and really meaning it as well. That's the important thing. So I'm just conscious of time. We ought to wrap up fairly soon. If anyone's got any more questions, please pop them in the chat. We've had a couple of comments, mainly just things about it's a very now topic, and also how are you managing to be at a conference and also running a podcast. So that's interesting. That's not that relevant, but thank you anyway. So what's next for Definely then? Can you tell us what's happening next? What's in development?
Yeah, so quite a lot. So we've really, like most startups, 4 years ago we started with a point solution, solving for a point problem. We now have 4 products in the market. We really are a suite of productivity solutions within Microsoft Word. Despite everything I've said around generative AI and where to start, we've taken a slightly more deliberate approach. I think we're lucky to have access to Microsoft, where we can really understand from them what are their concerns. What do they see as the application of generative AI within a B2B environment? And we've always been very conscious of not trying to jump on hype cycles to try win short-term business. We're a company with a long-term vision. And so, a lot of the customers that we've been working with over the past sort of year has been this back and forth. What are the true use cases? Where's the value? Who's impacted the most? How are your clients thinking about this? Bringing our customers who are in-house, banks, financial institutions, insurers, in front of our law firm customers and trying to get everyone to the same page around what cloud adoption means, access to data, restrictions on data security, and then building out solutions that we believe are really solving for problems using generative AI, and then deploying them within our customers and running tests. And then we'll shout about it from the rooftops, but we're not going to change our URL from definely.com to definely.ai and pretend suddenly we're an AI company, right? We mature and we focus on a long-term plan, essentially.
Yeah, great stuff. So are there any resources that you'd like to send our audience to if they are interested in learning more about AI in the legal industry?
I think Peter Duffy, for those who don't know, Peter Duffy has a great legal tech trends newsletter. He's like all over it. He really spends a lot of time actually doing horizon scanning for law firms and analyzing what's happening in the market. So by virtue of his role, he has access to this information. He does monthly newsletters, which are mandatory reading at Definely to keep up to speed. I think the technology is moving very fast. There are, people on Twitter, or X as it's now called, who are continuously giving their views and updates on this. These are people who are technically in the know. There is also another really good podcast called BG Squared, with a benchmark VC investor and another investor called Bill Gurley, who are very, they sit on the board of Meta, for example, and they really delve into some of these debates, open source, closed source, the fact that large language models outside of motor vehicles are the biggest depreciation assets out of any asset class, because as soon as GPT-4 comes out, the price of GPT 3.5 drops by 80% or something like that. So a lot of it is, unfortunately, at this stage, just really trying to, follow the right people on LinkedIn, definitely Duffy's newsletter, listening to podcasts, and just trying to have your finger in quite a few pies, because there's no centralized knowledge source at this time, unfortunately.
Yeah, apart from on your website, of course. I'm sure you've got some good resources on there, right?
Exactly.
Good stuff. Well, we will put all of these links in the show notes when it goes live. So today has been lovely. It's been a really interesting topic, and I think a topic that, if your law firm isn't involved with AI, then it's something that you've just got to do it. It's not really a non-negotiable anymore. It's not a case of, oh, that's a nice to do. It's let's see how it can help us, and go from there. So thank you, Rhys, for coming along today. It's been a lovely one.
Hopefully it was useful. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. So next we have Murray Gothill next week. So Murray is a happily retired lawyer, and the topic of the next one is it's a funny one. I laugh every time I say it. It's how to retire and live happily ever after until you die. So he is a retired lawyer. He's living out in Canada in the woods. He has a lovely time, and he mentors young lawyers coming through, and we're going to have a chat about his career and also just general mentoring in general about how to bring through the new wave of lawyers. So yeah, that'll be a very good one, and we have a packed July full of guests. So thank you for joining us today, and we will be over and out. Catch you next week. Bye.
Thank you.